So today we have Dr. Cathy Saenz. We were originally introduced through Dom D'Agostino, who's a very well-known ketogenic researcher, a couple of years ago. So she has a PhD. She also has an RD. So that's pretty exciting. So she's kind of got the clinical aspect as well as the scientific aspect of things. I'll actually let her talk about herself, but we're going to get into a lot of stuff related to athletic performance on a ketogenic diet. And I'm really excited to have her on because she is one of the best and one of the few researchers who's actually studied this firsthand. So thank you so much, Cathy.
Oh, thank you. What a kind introduction. I'm excited.
Yeah. So tell us about yourself.
Yes, excellent question. So I just started a position at Jacksonville University. So I'm an assistant professor here, and it's really cool because I teach nutrition, but I'm in the kinesiology department. And the kinesiology department here in Jacksonville University has two main tracks, one on health and one on performance that we're hoping to even identify because that's where the student body seems to be split. And it's awesome because a lot of people will gear to one or the other, but because I study exercise and nutrition and the types of work that I've gotten a chance to do, I can work on both sides, and it's awesome. And that's pretty much the theme of my entire career and professional development. I love the exercise side. I can't get over performance. It's so much fun. But there's something so amazing about working on the health side, and you really can't work on performance unless you have health. So the way I got there is before this position, I was actually working with the Cleveland Indians. So that's where I did my postdoc. And it's very unique and different to be stepping out of the academic world to go into the sports sphere, but it was awesome. And that was very, very applied sports nutrition and very educational based, so much fun. It was bilingual, it was international. So I got to work with a lot of young athletes that were learning nutrition and the personalization that has to come with sport. So I bring all of that to my new job. I didn't have that before because before that I was very research. So I finished up my doctorate at Ohio State University. I did my master's at UConn. And I did my bachelor's at the University of Maryland. So all big schools, a lot of performance-driven work, but a lot of research. So that's my foundation, is understanding the science. And then I've had the opportunity to actually translate that in real-world application, which is what brought me to this position. And it's so awesome because I get to do both every single day.
Fantastic. So you were part of the FASTER study with Dr. Jeff Volek, is that right?
Yes, yeah, that was my dissertation.
Awesome. So that's one of the most famous studies in ketogenic sports physiology. So could you describe what your role on that project was and basically what did you guys find?
Yes. Oh my gosh. We only have an hour, right? Oh gosh. What did we find?
No, we can.
Yeah, we'll do the quick and awesome version. So
okay.
The FASTER study was looking at fat-adapted, highly trained ultra-endurance athletes. So the athletes that we were able to work with for this study across the board some of them were Olympic level, most of them were sponsored or professional. We had some world record breakers in there, some national record holders, unbelievable athletes. And what we did is we found, and we had the opportunity to work with 20 ultra endurance athletes, 10 that were very high carb and very successful at being high carb, and the other half that we acted as their sport twin. So they raced in similar styles, they performed in similar ways. So we tried to keep them as equal as possible. They had similar training styles. The only main difference that we could find was that they followed a well-formulated ketogenic diet. So that means they were very low carb and they were fat adapted. And the other part of it is that each of them had to have been on their respective diets for at least 6 months. So we weren't getting athletes that were just trying this. We weren't getting the weekend warrior. We were getting people actually in the field winning medals and doing it following totally different nutritional strategies. And we brought them into the lab and we just studied them in the lab. I mean, they gave us the opportunity to poke and prod them and put them through a pretty typical training program for them, but for everybody else, a grueling 3 hours on a treadmill at 65% of their VO2 max. And we studied samples before, some samples were collected during, and a lot of samples afterwards of different metabolic markers. So we collected blood, we collected oxygen exchange rate to see what kind of fuels they were burning at the time. We did rates to see how hard they felt like they were working. We collected muscle tissue, like from their actual legs. We collected fat tissue. We even collected stool and urine, so there was no rock left unturned. And we found out some pretty cool things because unlike other studies, the high carb athletes were unbelievably well respected and they were doing really well in that diet. So this wasn't a study to find out which diet was better. It was very much just to learn what the differences were as objectively as possible. And one of the things that we found out was that the high carb athletes, when we looked at oxygen exchange rate, they were as well trained as you see in a textbook. Like they were able to use oxygen at a really high rate of their intensity, and they were able to kind of peak at that level, and then their carb stores would kick in. What we found was that the fat adapted athletes were able to use close to double the amount of fat at the exact same intensity, which for anybody in the exercise physiology world, that's groundbreaking. I mean, that had never, ever, ever been shown. And to be honest, nobody expected it. I mean, we thought they'd be a little bit higher, but nowhere near the levels that we actually saw. And it was consistent across the board. It wasn't one or two outliers. It was like a clear dichotomous difference. So that was a major metabolic difference. And another metabolic difference was glycogen, which is what I hear constantly, that when you go low carb, you deplete glycogen. And to be honest, that was our hypothesis because that's all the research that we've seen as well. But what we found in the study was that actually the low carb athletes had the exact amount of glycogen before they started the run, right after the run, and even the same amount of glycogen replenishment after the run, which is the really crazy part. Exactly the same as the high carbers.
Okay, so I want to dive into that one because that's really interesting to me. So I don't, yeah, no, exactly. So how do you expect that, I mean, is it just that they weren't using any glycogen at all? Is that why? Or is it something different?
Great question. Honestly, we rechecked that data so many times because we were so surprised when we saw it. And this was intramuscular glycogen levels. So we had the ability to see that they were actually burning and using fat from their oxygen exchange rates. And from all the other metabolites and blood markers that we looked at, glycerol backbone, their BHB. I mean, there were so many markers that we looked at that said, no, they're using fat for energy primarily. But there's a lot of theories on why the glycogen pattern went the way it did. At this point, we're not sure why. I think the big takeaway is that if you're keto adapted for long enough, some of those markers may be replicable in other types of athletes. So at least in those ultra endurance athletes, glycogen was the same. It's utilized for some reason during exercise, and then it's resynthesized for some reason during exercise, even though they had minimal, if any, carbs ingested. So this is the body doing it.
Yeah. So that's kind of where I want to kind of touch base on how do you think that's possible? Like how does the body, without any glucose at all, unless it's maybe taking some from protein, but it doesn't seem like that's probably the case. How does it actually replenish glycogen? Is it from the glycerol backbone, or maybe I'll just stop talking and let you.
No, I mean, these are all the exact same theories that we posed as well. So your body can make glycogen. So dietary carbohydrate is not an essential nutrient because an essential nutrient means that your body doesn't make it and you have to get it from the diet. And your body can make all the glycogen it needs for your brain, for the red blood cells, and it appears to replenish glycogen during exercise in a couple different ways. There's redundant pathways to make sure that you're good to go. So you could make it protein. In well-trained athletes, you rely a lot less on protein, and we didn't see any major differences on body composition. So it could be in some part from amino acids that are going to be making it again. The lactate could be recycled. And then there's also the glycerol backbone that can go right into gluconeogenesis to make more glycogen.
I don't know if that's very commonly understood. Can you explain what the glycerol backbone is?
Oh, yeah, of course. So your fat molecule, the most common one is a triglyceride. So it's a triglycerides. There's 3 fatty acids attached to what's called the glycerol backbone. And that way it's packaged and it can hang out in adipose tissue. You can repackage it in other stuff and take it all over the body. And then there's actual fat in the muscle itself. And for an athlete, that fat is used for energy. It's really close to mitochondria, your powerhouse and energy molecule in the cell. So you're able to use it really quickly. The fat part of that molecule is what goes into energy. And then you have what's called that glycerol backbone that can be recycled, that has other things in the liver, or it's used for other processes. In this situation for exercise, it's possible that that glycerol is being used to replenish glycogen. But then there's also another theory that the TCA cycle, which is part of one of your energy cycles, is also releasing metabolites to create additional energy within the cell. But the question that remains for why they're using glycogen is they have plenty of fat and they're clearly oxidizing fat for energy in these high fat adapted athletes. So it's not clear why they're using glycogen, because all of the other markers that we have to test what energy source they're using points to primarily fat. So that means those carb sources or carbon skeletons are being used for something else.
Do you think it's possible that they're just, although they're, quote unquote, only at like 65% of VO2 max, is that still just too high to really get in the fuel entirely from fat? And instead you might just say, well, okay, for the extra 5%, okay, we're going to use it. We're going to use some glycogen. Is that possible?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. 65% is what you would call in a classic ex-phys class, the crossover effect. That's right when your body starts feeling like it wants to use more carb than fat. Even in the person that has a regular diet, a traditional diet or a high carb diet, that is the point where your body says, all right, the intensity is high enough that I need a little more and I need quicker juice. And it's going to get that from carb stored energy. However, in this study, we were measuring their oxidation rates. So we knew what fuel source they were using throughout that entire run. And it was fat-based. I mean, they were burning, I think, I'd have to go back to the data, but I want to say upwards of 80%, while the high carb athletes were a lot more traditional in what they were using for energy. So there was clear distinction of what was being oxidized. So it is a theory, but all the data points that maybe there's another reason that they were using it, which is really cool. Like, what could that be? I don't know.
So, yeah, I agree. And so I wonder, like, did you have, or what, if you were going to do a follow-up study, like what would you do as a follow-up study on?
Oh man. So
I'm sure there's like 10 of them.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would love to learn how fat adapted athletes look across the board in their respective sports. So we focused on ultra endurance runners in this particular study. We also had 4 triathletes. So there were some mixed sport athletes in it, but they were matched to themselves. So we kind of took that part out of the equation. But I would also look at strength and power athletes and see if it's similar. And I would look at intermittent sports and more of your traditional Olympic sports. So soccer, basketball, tennis. So that would be the next step. I'd want to see, is it similar across the board if they've been adapted for that long? And the other thing I'd want to follow up on is my dissertation specifically focused on essentially what the epigenetic effects are, or epigenetic differences are between the diet, which is really, really cool. So essentially everybody has genetics. You've got your carbon blueprint, but then there's a layer of genetics called epigenetics, which is exactly that. You can change it from your environment. And that could be anything from heat, stress, but then food and diet and exercise affect your epigenetic in such a crazy way. And animal studies have been really, really cool to highlight that, but there just isn't as much in humans, especially not in healthy, active, crushing it in their sport humans. So that's what I got to look at. And again, hopefully that data is published soon, but there's some big differences there as well.
Can you talk about any of it? I know it's not technically public yet, but are you able to say anything?
Yeah, I say that it's essentially you can see how some of these processes begin at a much deeper level than just energy. So the diet is, and this has been shown in other studies as well, that possibly ketogenic diets have these deep internal epigenetic effects that affect you down to the cellular level. So it's not just, oh, I'm going to breathe more, I'm going to use more fat, but actually your entire system will reflect that you now are on a totally different diet. And that is similar to what we were looking to investigate. So it was really cool.
That is really cool. So I want to, I mean, shoot, there's like 500 different tangents that we could take on this. One that I actually want to talk about real quick is, there hasn't been, until you guys studied this, there really hadn't been a lot of studies on healthy athletes or even healthy people in general on a ketogenic diet. And until like the early 2000s, most of the studies that were done on a ketogenic diet were either related to epilepsy, or they're mostly just kind of pigeonholing a ketogenic diet as a starvation diet and just looking at the effects of ketosis, or I guess the effects of starvation on metabolism, and therefore saying, okay, well, a ketogenic effect is what you see. So, there's a lot of fear out there that a ketogenic diet may in fact be harmful for people. Based on what you've seen so far, having worked on both the high performance end as well as the health end, how would you kind of go about thinking about that?
I love this question. It's probably the one I get the most, and I think it's the most important and responsible one to ask, because there are such amazing benefits to it, but you got to know you have to know the good and the bad for it, right? So I think if it's well formulated, there are so many health benefits that can be reached. If it is not done correctly, or if you are currently in a metabolic dysregulation and on medications and not under the supervision of a qualified physician and nutrition or exercise team, like basically a qualified team to help you through it, then there are risk factors to consider. So basically, if you want to try it, make sure you're cleared and good to go is the responsible answer to give. But I know a lot of people that have just tried it off the cuff and done it really well and successfully, and they're awesome and they're rocking it. But there are a lot of really terrible ways to do it, and that's where I've heard the negative sides come out. And it gets blamed on the diet, but a lot of times the diet's just been done incorrectly. Yeah. So overall, I mean, it can be amazing for health.
Okay, so let's get into this. When you say well-formulated ketogenic diet, I want to say both from a positive standpoint, like what do you mean by well-formulated?
Yes. So first and foremost, it would be adequate calories for whatever it is that you need. Whether you're losing weight or you're looking to gain weight or stay the same weight, it has to be enough calories. So often people don't feel comfortable eating all the macronutrients that are required on a ketogenic diet and naturally decrease total calorie consumption. And then they're super tired, they're exhausted, they run into issues that are commonly referred to as like adrenal fatigue or something of that nature. You're just not eating enough, Do
you think that this is possible? So why do you think this happens? Is this because people are afraid of eating fat, or is it because they want to have, or do they just expect, okay, well, I have fat on me, and so therefore my body can burn that and I don't need to actually consume as much?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of reasons. Like so we'll go through the proper way to start it, and then there's all these nuances that you make yourself. But a well-formulated diet would be one that, on the grand scheme of things, offers enough calories for whatever it is that you need, puts you in nutritional ketosis, and is able to regulate electrolyte balance really well. So those three main keys are your make or break.
Got it.
So in any one of those pockets, something can go off and derail you, and then all of a sudden the diet's not healthy.
Yeah. So do you think that people get concerned then when you say, okay, well, if I'm just going to eat the same amount of calories that I did before, am I going to lose weight? Let's just say that weight loss is their goal. And so do they ask you this? And in which case, what's your answer?
First, I say, let's get your nutrient content correct. And this is definitely the nutrition side of me, but let's make sure you're getting in the essential nutrients that you need. So the essential fatty acids and the essential amino acids and all your essential vitamins and minerals. And the body kind of takes care of, like, a lot of people report a decrease in weight in the beginning. Some of that's body water weight that they lose from a natural diuresis that occurs with the diet. If that's occurring, yeah, go ahead.
Also, I expect it's not just the diuresis, but also the fact that you're now burning most of the glycogen that you used to have in your system, right?
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of glycogen can be used during that time, but you're not going to be glycogen depleted. You do decrease glycogen in the beginning, but as the faster study showed, at some point, at least in those ultra endurance athletes who are highly trained, but in them, glycogen replenishment synthesis and processes came right back up. So in the beginning, you do lose some water naturally through glycogen, naturally through diuresis. And then also because your sodium and electrolyte balance shift. And without that knowledge, you're going to lose a lot more water because your body's just not retaining it the same way. So you combine all those things together. If any of that goes wrong, so just fluid balance, just your electrolytes, if that goes wrong the first week, you can get heart palpitations, you can get really dizzy, terrible cramps, headaches, fogginess. Some people feel like they're going to pass out. All sorts of, your kidneys just aren't happy. Your heart's not happy. But if you can get sodium in check and up to proper levels, those things sort of take care of themselves. And a lot of people will state, I went through keto flu, which is really miserable if anybody's been through it. If you're able to get enough sodium in, keto flu kind of fades away. So the first couple of days are an adjustment, but I would say electrolyte and fluid balance are the biggest mistake I see. Second would be not enough fat or too much protein. I think that makes a lot of sense as well, because you've been eating the same way for 20, 30, 40, 50 plus years. So for decades of your life. And all of a sudden, you have to completely switch around your pantries, the way you go around the grocery store, recipes you look at, your hunger signals, like so much changes that, at least in the people I've seen be really successful, they mentally prepare and they do some background work to figure that part out.
So you mentioned too much protein you think is an issue. Why is that?
So if you are not high enough in fat and you're replacing it with protein instead, but you do decrease carbs. So you see this all the time, like they're low enough in carbs, but they're still not quite getting into nutritional ketosis. We go back, we do a diet check, a diet record check, and I'll find they're not eating enough fat. So you're not getting enough calories from that macronutrient. And if you're too high on protein, there's a couple things that go off. Really high protein may run into issues with energy, because protein isn't meant to be an energy molecule. It's meant to be structural. It's meant to maintain your body. It's essential. You need it, but you need it in the right amount of quantities. And second, if they go really high on protein, you might trigger insulin, which is the hormone, one of the hormones that really regulates fat metabolism. And what you're trying to do on a ketogenic diet, well, it's a lot of things, but one of the things is you're trying to keep insulin nice and steady. So if you go too high on protein and you keep spiking insulin, it's like you're doing all this work and just missing it at the finish line. So
yeah. So what level of protein do you think is too high? Is there a guideline or something that people can, like a framework that they can work with?
Yes. So I actually struggle with this one a lot because I love high protein diets. Like they're delicious and I see that they really work for a lot of people. The challenge with a high protein diet and knowing how much you need is that it is unbelievably individual to your training status, your sport type, and then what your ultimate goals are. So we're talking for an athlete. Like if you are an athlete and you have to put on weight for your particular sport and it needs to be and you want it to be more lean tissue than anything else, then we're probably going to change around your training. And then also your protein will naturally go up. So for a ketogenic diet, I used to be a lot stricter. I used to say, somewhere between 15 to 20%. But what I've found actually working, so this is probably not the responsible thing to say, but actually working in the field, and there isn't enough science to find the answer. I pretty much keep protein up as comfortable as that person wants it, as long as it doesn't knock them out of nutritional ketosis. Okay. So I measure everything up against nutritional ketosis. And so some people are able to take protein up a little bit higher, especially around their workouts, and other athletes just have to stay in a smaller range. So it just really depends.
So just for clarification, when you say 15 to 20%, I assume you mean 15% of their calories from protein? Got it.
Total calorie intake, yeah.
Yeah. And so then,
for reference, like most athletes sit at 15 to 25%. So it's not like they're going to a low protein diet. It's very, very much within range. But if you're an athlete that's used to a high protein diet, so somewhere in that 25 to 35%, then we've got to see if any modifications need to be made.
Makes sense. So let's just say that you're talking to a person who's not working out and they actually don't have specific training goals. Is there sort of like a baseline level of, okay, well, metabolic processes require X or Y amount of protein, in which case, what would you tell that person?
So all protein is put into 10 to 35%. Those are recommendations for it. I usually don't drop anybody below 15.
Okay.
So that's my personal clinical approach to it. I start at 15% and take it up from there because it is such an important nutrient. And I don't know, it's so much with it, and it's delicious, and it has so much nutrient density. So yeah, I don't drop it below 15 unless it's a clinical situation. But if it's the average healthy individual that maybe just doesn't, just your weekend warrior or someone who has an office job and gets a couple workouts in, but they wouldn't consider themselves highly trained, I keep it at 15 at least.
Yeah. But the interesting thing is that it doesn't seem like there's a lot of good studies on how much protein is actually like the quote unquote right amount.
No, there really isn't enough. I hope that's actually something I'm really interested in looking at further, especially for our military and tactical athletes. Because if your nutritional ketosis, one, would be so powerful for them for a variety of reasons. But also, the last thing you would ever want is to sacrifice any type of muscle wasting, which they are finding that ketogenic diets can help combat that. There's less lean tissue loss. However, also to get the nutrients in to maintain it with their high stress and active lives. Or any type of athlete that's doing really high intensity work and there's a lot of muscle breakdown. Just again, to provide the nutrients needed to maintain mass and all the essential nutrients that come with that exercise. But there really isn't, but that's true with protein across the board. There's ranges that people stick within, but I think that speaks to the personalization. Like it comes back to the individual and it'll change depending on where you are in life.
Totally. So the funny thing is, I think I swerved us down the safety aspect of things, which is great. I think people definitely need that. We haven't talked at all about some of the benefits. You had just mentioned there's a potential for a lot of, benefits for tactical forces. And also even I'm curious to see what you found in terms of the advantages that a ketogenic diet had over a high carb diet for those highly trained athletes as well, or just any other experiences that you've had.
Yeah, no, this is my favorite question to answer. So I guess I take back that the other question was my favorite one. This one was the favorite one.
They can all just be questions. But also they're not unique. I mean, I'm not asking I'm not a smart human being for asking these questions.
No, these are the ones that people want to know, right? This is what I want to know too. I'm researching
there we go.
it. So we didn't go out to compare outside of metabolic differences. But anecdotally, so anybody that works in the science world, cover your ears for a second, because this is anecdotal research, but there is there is scientific and descriptive research that's coming out in a lot of these areas, and now randomized controlled trials that are getting built off of it.
Mm-hmm.
But basically what's been found is a couple of things. So we'll start with the brain, but brain energetics change on a ketogenic diet. That's why epilepsy is so powerful, because you're able to change the energetics for the brain, and now the brain can function off of a different physiological milieu, if you will. So from that standpoint, things that people have reported on a ketogenic diet is they feel a lot more alert, a lot more awake, reaction time reduces, so you get quicker, decision-making, people feel like it improves. And they're doing research now in the areas of depression, in areas of schizophrenia, of areas of a lot of mental health issues. They're starting to look at how to use diet, and not just ketogenic diets, but just even improving diet across the board. So reducing trans fats, reducing added sugars, sticking with whole foods. And then now, of course, that's led into ketogenic diets as well. So that's pretty cool and incredible. It's also being looked at for a lot of neurological disorders as well, because it has such a powerful effect on the neurological system. So trickling down, some of the other benefits that people find is an improvement in metabolic health. And they're starting to tease into the weeds, but some of the initial things that you'll see is that your cholesterol profile improves. Not necessarily the same way it does on a high carb diet. It's got a very unique profile, but overall it seems to improve, which is awesome.
When you say improve, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, so improvement, the very first thing you're going to notice, even if you don't go on a ketogenic diet, let's say you just reduce carbs as a whole, triglycerides improve. So you're able to better manage the triglyceride level that you need in your blood. And most people, you want to lower it. So the exact same thing is seen on a ketogenic diet. Like within a few days to weeks, triglycerides lower. So within 3 weeks, you see cholesterol changes. That's how long it takes for the lipid panels to change. HDL will go up, and LDL at times also goes up. So that's where a lot of folks get very nervous, because LDL is considered our bad cholesterol. Mm-hmm. But further research has been done in this area, and what they're finding is that it's not as simple as looking at the whole number. The type of LDL that goes up is not the one that leads to all of the heart disease and cardiovascular risks. So even though the total number goes up, the profile itself improves.
So which LDL number should people actually try to keep down?
So LDL as a whole is what they're going to give you, but the LDL particle can be broken up into so many different fragments. And what they're going to do is they'll look at LDL particle size. That's the test it's called. You have to ask for an additional test to get that taken. And what you're looking at in that particle size is how large are those LDLs. The smaller they are, the more dangerous they are, because they've got an easier chance at turning into like a dangerous molecule, if you want to say. And that's the one you want to keep low. What they've done is they see these people that are on ketogenic diets for a bit, they get a cholesterol panel, they panic because their LDL's gone up. You're like, oh my gosh, everything else looks amazing. What's going on here? They'll take a deeper dive and find out actually LDL is trending in a positive direction. So while there isn't a for sure way to say that you're in the clear, what they're finding is that maybe this is what a healthy profile looks like on a ketogenic diet. So research is active in that area to make sure that we're okay. So you can't say for sure, but it's trending in a positive direction. The other thing that will happen is insulin regulates better, which is unbelievable for anybody that struggles with any sort of metabolic disorder, which is like 50% of the population. Yeah. So insulin regulation is going to get better. Glucose usage and the overall number decreases, and you're able to regulate that better as well. So your metabolic profile just improves. Blood pressure can be better regulated, body composition, so power to weight ratio for athletes. And research right now is extending that, kind of trickling down the body. Now we're getting into the legs and the muscles. And one of the things that people are reporting and therefore researching more of is to see if ketogenic diets affect inflammation, immune, and oxidative stress pathways. Because a lot of people report that when they go on a ketogenic diet, their recovery is so much quicker. And I can say that from experience, and I can also say that from some of the blood markers that we've looked at. However, there isn't definitive research to say for sure. So there's ongoing work in that area.
When you're saying recovery, you mean like recovery from a sickness?
So recovery from exercise-induced damage.
Mm-hmm.
So exercise tears the body up in a totally awesome way, but you have to be able to repair it. So if you're an individual that takes a while to recover, or if you have any sort of disease or risk factor that takes a lot longer to recover, well, it goes back to some of those things we said, like a ketogenic diet may raise ketones that have potentially an anti-catabolic effect. So that research paper came out from actually one of the students in Dom's lab and some really awesome researchers overseas.
Oh, who's that?
That's the Egan group in Ireland, and they came out with a paper with Dom's group, and I think it's called the anti-catabolic effect of ketones. And it's a research, it's a review paper. It just came out, I want to say a month ago, but it highlights some key studies in the area, some of it's animal models, and hoping to translate that into humans and do a lot more research. And so much application for athletes, but so much application for disorders and diseases like cancer, cachexia, any type of neurological muscle wasting disorders, aging. I mean, the list goes on and on. It's very, very new, but people are using it and research is going on. So something's happening.
So one of the things that I think there's the concern about is like, okay, assuming that the majority of the research is A, still in the works, and B, been done in different circumstances, like really, really hypocaloric, like basically starvation diets or epilepsy. And then also considering the fact that, as you had mentioned, there's some risks to a poor formulated diet. People are saying, well, okay, the ketogenic diet from like an evolutionary perspective was not actually, likely wasn't all that adaptive. What is your opinion on how much we were in and not in ketosis when we were, let's just say, before the advent of grains?
Yeah, I've never been asked that one before. So
yes, unique. I'm unique. Right.
Yeah, just speculating. I think it would depend on what region you lived in. So what your vegetation was around you. So if you had, especially in colder climates where they might have relied more on seafood or animal-based proteins, then it'd be a different adaptation than if you were part of a culture that was a lot more plant-based.
So
very neutral response, because I guess I think it's absolutely correct that not everybody, the same thing that we have today, not everybody would have been on the exact same type of lifestyle. It would have been reflective of where they were. Do you
think, and obviously it sounds like there's zero evidence or there's no research yet on this, but do you think that it's possible that there's different ethnicities who might do better on a ketogenic diet than others if their ancestry, lived in a certain part of the world?
Yeah, you know what? I've thought about that quite a bit. So I'm from a Hispanic background where there is a lot of coconut oil, palm oil, avocado oils, and those fruits and veggies as well. And just from what I learned, how much diet affects our epigenetics, that it does make sense that you were equipped to better manage and handle certain foods. And you also see that there's certain food allergies and food discrepancies in different cultures and in different peoples. And so I think that there is a genetic component to it. However, what I've also learned is that epigenetics is very flexible. So you're not stuck to that railing. I think you're also incredibly flexible to adapt to different things. And if you just look at the lifespan, babies are essentially fat adapted. At birth, you're fat adapted because that's what you are using for energy in utero. So your first taste of sugar is lactose in milk. So at that point, But babies use so much fat. I mean, their brains are developing, tissues are developing, and children oxidize so much fat. It isn't until you start to get older that you're starting to rely on glucose more. So you are flexible. So I don't think we could either use the excuse that because we're genetically geared to eat a certain diet, you couldn't switch over to one.
Yeah. I see what you're saying. You're saying that basically the power of the epigenome might kind of be more important than any specific sort of ethnicity, because ultimately we're all programmed with a decent amount of variance in what genes we're able to express.
Nailed it. I think it's not as cookie cutter. I think that possibly there's some component where all metabolize certain things differently than you would, but also we can switch off. And in different stressful situations, I mean, that's what makes the body so awesome, that you're built to last, because you're built to maintain all these stressful situations and calm situations and move all around the world. So I think maybe we haven't even gotten into the microbiome, which was another area that I did during my doctorate. And that has also been shown to change so much with diet. And our microbiome is like 80% of our immune system, which is so much of our structure. So if you can change that, I mean, the rest of you's got to be pretty flexible.
Have you seen, related to the microbiome, have you seen any positive changes or just differences, either from an anecdotal, or is there any research out on it yet for the ketogenic diet?
We did research on it. That was one that I got to lead up on how the microbiome shifted for people that were following. This study was awesome. It was incredible. We looked at people that were with metabolic syndrome, and every 3 weeks, we started them out on a very low, well-formulated ketogenic diet.
Real quick, to just interrupt you, can you explain what metabolic syndrome is?
Oh, yes. Yeah, of course. So metabolic syndrome is essentially metabolic dysregulation that puts you at risk for all sorts of diseases. So cardiovascular disease, heart disease, which is, I think, still the #1 killer in the States, which is really sad. Diabetes type 2, and even some cardiopulmonary disorders. So it puts you at risk for all of these metabolic diseases. And it's 5 risk factors. And if you have 3 of the 5, you're at higher risk for anything else. So it doesn't mean you have it. It just means your risk factor has now increased. So they look at triglycerides, you look at waist circumference, you look at blood pressure, you look at glucose, and there's one more that I always forget. I want to say body weight or BMI. We'll have to Google that because I always forget one of the 5. But if you have 3, so basically like a lot of those, and you can get a lot of that information if you go in for a physical. And if you go in for a physical and you've got 3 of the 5 as a risk factor, then all of a sudden you're what's considered metabolic syndrome. But I see that as the point where you can change your life. Like, all right, you went into the yellow zone, you're not in the red zone. Like you can come back into green. So if proper diet and exercise is employed, you're able to reduce those factors and improve health for long term. So that's really cool.
So is that what you found? I think I interrupted you when you were telling me about the effects of a ketogenic diet to the microbiome for these people.
So what we found was that we put people on a ketogenic diet, but every 3 weeks we decrease their fat and increase their carbs. So by the end of the 7th diet, I believe, by the end of the 21 weeks, they were now at what is a recommended diet for somebody that has diabetes or is pre-diabetic, which is really high carb. It's moderate carb, moderate protein, and really low in fat. So we just kind of flip-flop them throughout the diet. And we took microbiome samples to see what it would look like. So what we found out is that it's really hard to study the microbiome in humans. And there might not be a profile that every single person has, but typically it seems to be well accepted that if you have more diversity in your gut flora, then it matches with health improvements.
Sure.
So if you've got a lot of variety going on in there, it can do a lot of different things. And we have seen that a lot of people that have ulcerative colitis or GI disorders go on these reduced carb or reduced sugar diets and find improvement. And hoping to do some collaborations with some GI folks and some physicians and surgeons to see if we can work together and learn more about it. Because to be honest, there's not much.
Did you find that over the 21 days, I think that's how long you said, was there, as the carbs increased, was there any difference in the gut microbiome diversity?
Yeah, there was a difference, but the reason why I'm not putting heavy stake on it is that it was our first time doing a study like that. And we went back and looked at our methods, and it might not have been optimal methods for what we were asking. Sure. So we presented the data. It was really exciting. And the feedback we got was to make improvements for next time. But that's another one where anecdotally people said that they felt a lot better. And there was one person who did have a lot of GI disorders. And once he was on a ketogenic diet, he said he just felt better. Now, you can't put that to the masses, and you can't say it was for the microbiome, but I think it's really powerful for that individual. So it's worth investing.
Do you feel like there are any downsides to being on a ketogenic diet all the time, like 100% of the time?
I think it can be challenging socially. A lot of people say that you get used to it, and you do, but there comes a point where, I don't know, maybe you want the cake that your grandma makes for your birthday. You know, like there's very personal social reasons. And beyond that, if you miss something, there's so many substitutes and alternatives to go. Like, people are so creative in the kitchen that I feel like if it's working for you, the benefits outweigh the risks totally. That being said, there aren't any long-term studies done. So I'm speaking more from the people that I've worked with that have been so happy with the results. Like, they're in it to win it.
Sure. Yeah. So that makes sense. I guess my question is kind of coming back to almost the paleo argument that I made before, which is that if there were certain ethnicities or tribes or whatever that had, let's just say, certain seasons where there were more or less carbs, is it important to cycle those carbs? So it sounds like that's an interesting question that yet has not been answered.
No, there isn't a ton of work on cyclic diets, and more of the strength power athletes that I work with want cyclic diets because at some point, again,
gold season, bro.
Yeah, they're looking for a pump. Like, at some point they want a pump, and they'll say that, like, I just need a little bit of juice right now. And so at that point, I think it depends. Again, like, I think people can be a little more flexible with their macronutrients. And the way you know if you're doing a ketogenic diet correctly is, one, you should feel great on it. Like, you should feel good. If you're not feeling good, then we gotta check something out. Your health markers should be all improving, like yada, 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 but also you're in nutritional ketosis. If you're in nutritional ketosis, a lot of people play with their carbs. Like, you can go, so for example, these fat adapted athletes we were working with, some of them were higher carb than I expected. And they ate things like sweet potatoes and other whole foods that you wouldn't ever put in a ketogenic diet, but they were able to stay nutritional ketosis and do the sport that they did. So that's the key.
Do you know how many, like on the upper end, how many grams of carbs they would actually consume per day?
So we went by percentage. I think 15% was not unusual to see. And this isn't even just the subgroup that we actually studied. There were a lot of athletes that we screened to see if it was appropriate for the study. So they went up pretty high. Like, I think a lot of people assume you've got to be at 5% or under 50 grams. It might be true to start. It might be true if you have metabolic dysregulation, but for an athlete, at least personally, when I'm working with them, we play with it.
So how many calories were these people consuming a day?
Yeah, they were not as high as you would. I mean, I guess they followed endurance athletes. To be honest, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it wasn't like they were consuming 4 or 5,000 calories. Like we
Yeah.
could say somewhere in the 2 to 3,000 range. I think I'm low on that, but I just can't remember off the top of my head.
Got it. Makes sense. Okay. So I was seeing if I could just kind of do the math real quick to actually figure out the grams if they actually were, but it's no big deal.
It would be like around the 100 to 150 grams.
Okay. And that's actually something that I wanted to talk about, because I know, and I want to get at the difference between power athletes and endurance athletes, because it feels like there's a really big difference, but there's not a lot of studies yet on the endurance or the power athletes. I know that, like, who is it? Is it Aaron Wilson? Jacob Wilson. Yes. Jacob Wilson is actually doing some cool studies out of, I forget where, if it's also Tampa. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, Tampa. He seems like that facility is really the only group out there doing studies on power athletes. Is that right? Am I wrong?
Yeah, there are some groups overseas that do
Ireland.
Some in South Africa, some in Italy. So, and I want to say Ireland and overseas, but you're right. There really is not that much. Like for those athletes, especially in the strength world, there just isn't a ton of info, and they've had to kind of figure it out on their own.
Yeah.
I've probably worked with more strength athletes than endurance athletes. So just by that nature, I've learned a couple tricks of the trade, but in terms of research, we don't have many places to turn to.
Let's talk about that. So, like, what are the differences when you're formulating these diets for someone? How would you start them out differently?
The biggest one is probably calorie differences. So typically the strength athletes, or if they're in some sort of weight class sport, their calorie needs are much higher. Endurance athletes actually need the same amount. They need high calories, but typically endurance athletes aren't the ones known for eating high calorie diets. But making sure they get adequate calories is so essential for their sport so they don't tank out. But probably when I'm working with a strength athlete, I'll pay attention to calories a lot more and to protein a lot more.
Got it. So, sorry?
Sodium.
And sodium. Makes sense. So is it possible, here's what when I first did keto, it was almost 4 years ago. And I actually did not have a fun time with it. And it was about, I stuck with it for about 2 months or so. And I was very militant about how many carbs I had. I felt like I ate enough. I was definitely always full, and I ate a decent amount of like protein, but I was also doing CrossFit every day. And so I was doing CrossFit as well as Olympic lifting. And so for me, what was interesting is that I found I honestly was completely dead. I felt like I was having enough sodium and also potassium. I basically got that like Morton's light stuff. So it's basically half sodium, half potassium. And so, but for me, it wasn't as good. And I would do my workout, and within like 2 minutes, I'd like kind of bonk is what I felt like. Do you think, and by the way, I've since, gotten on a ketogenic diet, but the funny thing is that I'm a lot less strict than I used to be, still in nutritional ketosis, like you were talking about, but I'm like eating a lot more carbs. And so do you think it was actually a matter, for me, I'm just curious, if it was a matter of just not having enough carbs for my glycogen, especially with the fact that I hadn't been completely adapted yet, or do you think it could have been something different?
The first place that I would go to was what I see every single athlete probably struggle with this. The only definitive answer I'll give is that they don't scale back the exercise at first, because you're already breaking down, you're already asking your body to do so much, and now you're going to hit it hard in the gym. And the reality is that your metabolism is shifting so much. So it is so difficult, but just scaling it back for a week or two to give yourself some time to adjust, and then entering it on a more tailored phase. So try different intensities to see what's going on. As soon as you feel yourself not feeling great, that's actually where I tell the athletes to take some sort of protein shake or sodium. A lot of times that takes care of it. But yeah, I think exactly what you said. Like there's something to be said about not having to be as strict and instead checking blood levels, like checking data rather than the scale, the food scale.
Yeah.
Let you know what you need.
I mean, because at the time I was like, well, you know what, like it's supposed to be, less than 30 grams a day. So I just have to do this. And, I think the other thing as well is like people talk about the ketogenic adaptation period and, they're like, oh, well, it can take as long as, a couple months or something. And so I was effectively using that as my excuse to feel like crap, like, like absolutely dead. And so that because I didn't know, because I kind of felt like that was just what you had to do. But it turns out that that's not what you have to do. There, you can do it in a much better way. Sounds like is what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it. Like the second you're not feeling great, it may take a few days, but if you've got everything in check and you're still feeling terrible after a couple weeks, like we got to go back and like that shouldn't be happening at all.
Yeah.
And I actually have a power athlete that I work with, and he stays under 30 grams and does awesome. And then another power athlete competes in a different weight class and he's at about 100, 150. Both incredible athletes. It just depends on what your body is, what your health needs are, and what your performance is asking of you. So like it can be played with so much. It really can be. So
when you say someone's in nutritional ketosis, what do you generally like their BHB levels to be at?
So by definition, textbook definition, nutritional ketosis would be beta hydroxybutyrate at around 0.5. But 0.8 is typically what I try to strive for with people, with folks. 0.8. And some people actually do have really big challenges reaching that, and they get really down on themselves for it. So I'd like more research on that too. But 0.8 to 1.2 is where people really start to feel a lot of the mental differences and neurological benefits that we were talking about. That's when they report it.
So do you see any, I mean, and by the way, back in the day when I was doing this for the first time, and by the way, I kind of cycle on and off keto at this point, and I feel fine on it. And I don't feel the need to be completely strict all the time, but I perform pretty decently both in life and in the gym. But, when I was doing it for the first time, I would get up to like 4 or 4.5 or so, which is a lot. So is there any point at which you'd say, wow, like there's actually maybe too much, or is it more just a feeling thing? Hey, if you're not feeling good, then maybe think about redoing some things.
I'm going to be honest. I don't know the answer to that question. That's something that I need to study more of. The upper end, like I guess I've always studied it can be challenging for people to even enter nutritional ketosis, so the lower ends, but so much more work is being done at the higher ends of nutritional ketosis that's something I would like to learn as well, because I just don't know.
Cool. So you know what, could we real quick define nutritional ketosis versus ketoacidosis, because I also know that that's a concern that a lot of people have.
Yes. Nutritional ketosis is actually totally normal, naturally occurring every single day. We have ketones that raise in our body. So all ketones are metabolites from fat metabolism. So they're produced in the liver, they circulate all over the body, and they have all sorts of effects. One of them being energy, but as we're finding, they might be the reason why there's so many systemic effects of the diet, and then also being researched in supplements. So nutritional ketosis is a naturally occurring process in the body. That just means you are using fat for energy and then have these metabolites that are being used for energy and more circulating in the body. They can occur in anybody that their metabolism is working efficiently or has no major issues. Ketoacidosis is a life-threatening, very, very serious condition But that occurs in someone that has major insulin dysregulation, not even dysregulation, like it occurs in type 1, in diabetics, type 1 and type 2. But essentially your insulin goes off the charts, your fat metabolism goes crazy. And the way I've heard it explained best, I think Dr. Volek is the one who mentions this. Nutritional ketosis is like getting caught in a drizzle. Like you just have a couple of ketones floating around. It's totally normal and naturally your body's producing it for benefit. Ketoacidosis would be a torrential downpour and major metabolic dysregulation that's occurring. And it means that your energy systems are going haywire and you have to get to the hospital as soon as possible. So if glucose is high and ketones are high, many times they'll check urine, they check blood, and it's a whole clinical, very serious situation. But nutritional ketosis is the other side. It's welcomed, it's awesome, it's really great for health. And if it works for you, then you'll find that you've unlocked like a totally other side of your metabolism.
Sure. And so it sounds like, though, what you're saying is that unless you already have some existing condition like type 2 diabetes or type 1 diabetes that you're probably already very well aware of, then there's really no real risk of actually getting into this ketoacidosis.
No. I mean, that's so rare. It's not rare in those with diabetes. Unfortunately, it's sad and it's really scary. But for the normal average person trying a ketogenic diet, if you don't feel well, most likely it's one of those three things that I mentioned in the beginning. The calories are off, electrolytes are off, or there's something funky going on in the macronutrients.
Got it. That makes sense. So some people are also concerned with, and I know we just keep bringing up all these concerns, but I think it's, you're probably the most, adequate in terms of talking about those concerns. So some people are wondering, okay, well, what about thyroid health and other types of things? Because doesn't it mess up with your metabolism?
Yes. So fair concern. And I'm happy that people want to make sure that their health isn't messed up when they're looking at the diet. From the research that's been done, I'm going to go towards adrenal fatigue because that one I've studied a little bit more. I haven't studied thyroid health intimately, but from everything I've read, that's another one where if you're running into thyroid issues, then something's gone off in the diet. If it's well formulated, then you should have no issues. But if anything's been off, if you're low in calories, especially low in electrolytes, if you're low in micronutrients, then yeah, you're going to run into a lot of health issues, thyroid included, from what I've read. But I've studied adrenal fatigue a lot more, especially as it relates to athletes, especially in the context of overtraining.
And really, before you go into that, can you actually describe what adrenal fatigue is?
So adrenal fatigue is this. So the adrenal cortex sits above the kidneys, and what they do is they release all sorts of different hormones and signals. And they're very active in our fight or flight response, but also when we're exercising, a lot gets released to make sure all of our system can get that pump up and also relax when needed. Adrenal fatigue is when you're overworking any of those systems or not supporting them well, and you're exhausted. And people describe it as this, it's almost like being low in a vitamin. Like you're just so tired, you have trouble sleeping, recovery is terrible, you're higher risk. You have a higher risk of injury. Basically, it's a miserable period to go through. A lot of the things that I've seen with adrenal fatigue have to do with energy availability. So essentially, you're not eating enough and therefore not sustaining the demand that you're putting on the body. So it's really common in anybody in a weight class sport, anybody that's restricting energy and then also trying to do keto but not eating enough fat. And then it's really common in endurance athletes. And I see it a lot also in aging, like as people get older and they either losing their appetite or they just don't feel comfortable eating as much. Yes, you may need less calories, but you still need enough calories to sustain what you're doing. Unless you're cycling through some sort of fasting, or we didn't even get into that. That's the fun stuff, right? That's a different setting, but just not getting enough nutrients,
Mm-hmm.
that's what I see running into the issue. And sometimes that's roped with thyroid issues because the symptoms are similar.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. So that makes sense. I do actually, because I was distracted by what you said about fasting, which I completely agree, and I want to talk about that actually, because one thing I get a little bit concerned with is I think I see a lot of people who are super hardcore. You know, they're kind of like me. They're like, oh, I'm going to be a CEO and I'm going to like burn the candle at both ends. I'm also going to like train super hard in the gym, either, you know, endurance or something else, power. And I'm also going to do a lot of fasting, and I'm also not going to eat much, and I'm going to do intermittent fasting as well. And and I would expect that there's this, because it's very trendy these days to do some sort of fasting. Now, I just put the worst possible spin on that ever. However, I know that for a lot of people, intermittent fasting can be fantastic. So in which groups of people would you recommend fasting, and what types of benefits have you seen for those people?
So I don't recommend it. I don't recommend it in the sense of I don't use it as prescription for diet prescription. However, if someone's doing it, I agree. I've seen some people that absolutely love it. I'd want to caution on lean muscle mass loss, but I say that, and then Terry Crews does intermittent fasting. So I'm like, oh, right. He's kind of throwing a wrench in that one. But if done incorrectly, you can run into issues with muscle mass.
Sure.
The people that I've seen have a lot of success with it, which may surprise folks, but those that have issues with their pancreas or actually have more metabolic disorders. And again, I've never prescribed it, just discussing it. I've seen those patients just kind of take a break from food for a little bit and let their system rest. So it's not the response that people expect. I see a ton of bodybuilders do it, and they do really great on it, so to say. We don't check their physiology, but they're doing it and they seem happy.
Yeah.
But I actually see a lot of people on the health and disease side using it in really powerful ways for themselves. And that's what a lot of people report. They say they like that they're able to control when they eat and how they eat. And I think that's an element that isn't discussed enough in science. But it's pretty cool to see them figuring it out, because there's not a lot of info for those patients.
Sure. Well, I also think, just as you alluded to it, the psychological aspect around food, to be able to say, look, I don't have to be controlled by what I eat every single moment of every single day. And so that is actually quite limited, or it provides a lot of freedom for someone to be able to say, wow, I actually have a lot more like power, and my body is a lot more adaptable than I originally, had thought, because I originally thought I had to have, lunch exactly at noon. And if I didn't, well, then I would die.
Yeah. No, it's true. And most of the diets of the people that I've worked with, I've tried almost all of them except fruitarian. I have not tried fruitarian or carnivore. I haven't tried those two. But I'm curious about carnivore, but I haven't tried it. But I've tried intermittent fasting and I actually really like it. But the challenge with it is there isn't a ton of evidence to support either which way or to tell us much about it. So at this point, we're going off of centuries and just things that our grandparents and great-grandparents and people have been doing since the beginning of time, are periods of fast. So I think there's something there, but at the same time, it's another one that can be done wrong. So the people that I've seen fast, they don't sacrifice electrolytes for the most part. Some people do just water fast, but typically they don't sacrifice electrolytes. Some people say they fast, and what they mean is I'm just having protein shakes. So there's also so many definitions of it. So I'm curious to see how that's going to span out in 10 years.
Got it. Yeah, it is interesting because there's the I guess the technical definition that you might say for intermittent fasting is like I think a lot of people have changed it. For instance, I was talking with a guy named Dr. Sachin Panda, who has done some of this research around compressed feeding windows. And, in his mind, that's a compressed feeding window, but not an intermittent fast. It's like an intermittent fast might be 1 or 2 days or whatever off of food. So sometimes, if we can't even agree on the definition of intermittent fasting, then it looks like there's some work to do before we truly understand exactly what it's doing to us.
Oh my God, it's so true. And it trickles down into the everyday person. I guess I'm an everyday person, but I hear people say, last night I did a 10-hour fast. But did you do a 10-hour fast or did you sleep? Like there's, but people feel like, exactly. So, but for those individuals, when I hear them talk about it, they feel so excited and they feel good. So it's also like, well, you know what? Who am I? Without checking them physiologically or beyond, there's something really powerful going on in that sector, but there isn't a ton known. And the clinical and the scientific side of me wants to say, oh, muscle mass or, what other systems are going to increase that who knows if you wanted that to change. But again, there's people doing it and they do it with success. So I'm excited for research in that area.
Well, it sounds like there's a ton more research available for us, and we're only just scratching the surface, which is why I'm really excited to have people like you on the show. So, Dr. Cathy Saenz, where can people find out more about you and your work?
Oh, yes. So I am at Jacksonville University. I also consult privately. So Embodied Health and Performance is the LLC that I've got with a partner. And he does strength and conditioning and exercise, and I do the nutrition side, but both of us, I have my CSCS as well. So both of us have a background in both areas. So it's pretty cool to get dual sides. And I go to conferences. I love speaking to people. So thank you so much for this opportunity. So I encourage people to reach out. I can't wait to hear more.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. And we'll talk to you later.
Yes, thank you.
This podcast was brought to you by Ample. Ample is the company that I founded a few years ago when I realized how difficult it could be to stick to a healthy whole foods diet that we talk about on the podcast within the confines of a busy life. See, when time was short, I often found myself and others turning to convenience foods, but I found that they either had poor ingredients, too much sugar, or they just didn't fill me up. So that's when I started Ample. Ample's a nutritious, complete meal replacement drink made from quality, real food ingredients that makes it super simple to eat healthy on the go. We've made Ample with a blend of premium proteins, healthy fats, fiber, organic greens, and probiotics. It's low in carbs and sugar and is designed to keep you full and energized for several hours. Our original ketogenic and plant-based formulas make an awesome breakfast, lunch at the office, post-workout meal, or quick meal on the go. And they're available in 400 or 600 calorie meal sizes. Ample provides the quality nutrition you need without you having to skip a beat. Check it out at amplemeal.com.